If you grew up in Britain during the 1970s or 80s, you know that time travel is actually possible. All it takes is a specific smell. Maybe the scent of damp wool drying on a radiator, or the synthetic strawberry aroma of an Angel Delight, and suddenly you are back there. You are 10 years old, your knees are grazed, you have 10p in your pocket, and the world is yours. But specifically, I want to take you back to the most critical time of the day. Not the morning assembly, not the double maths lesson that felt like it lasted 3 decades. No, I'm talking about 3:30 p.m., the golden hour. Do you remember the tension of 3:29 p.m.? Sitting at a wooden desk that had been carved into by generations of bored children before you, staring at that big analog clock on the classroom wall. The second hand moved with an agonizing slowness that defied the laws of physics. The teacher is droning on about long division or the Tudors, but nobody is listening. We are all just coiled springs, waiting. And then, the bell. That electric shrill metal bell that signaled one thing: freedom. Nowadays, the area outside a school looks like a showroom for SUVs. Parents are lined up in 4x4s with heated seats to whisk their offspring 200 yards down the road. But back then, the school gate was a floodgate. We spilled out onto the pavement like a swarm of bees, and the moment we crossed that threshold, the teacher's authority evaporated. We were in the wild now. For the vast majority of us, there was no school run. You walked. Rain, shine, snow, or that peculiar British weather type that is somehow all three at once, you walked. It didn't matter if you were 7 years old or 15, you were expected to navigate the streets of Britain with the navigational skills of a homing pigeon. The walk home wasn't just a commute, it was an adventure. Or, more accurately, an obstacle course. You didn't just walk in a straight line, that would be inefficient. You had to kick a stone. Remember that? You would find the perfect stone, not too big, not too small, and you would dribble it along the pavement gutters all the way home. If you lost it down a drain, it was a genuine tragedy. You felt a sense of loss that modern children probably only feel when the Wi-Fi goes down. And let's talk about the weather. Looking back, does anyone else feel like it was permanently grey? We didn't have Gore-Tex jackets or breathable fabrics, we had cagoules. Those nylon torture devices that kept the rain out but trapped all your own sweat in, so you arrived home boiled like a bag of rice. Or, if you were slightly older, you had a parka with that fur-lined hood that when wet smelled exactly like a wet dog, regardless of whether you owned a dog or not. But the cold didn't matter, the damp didn't matter, because on that walk home you had a destination, a sanctuary, the corner shop. This was the center of our economic universe. The bell above the door would ding as you walked in and you would be hit by that smell. You know the one. It's a mixture of newsprint from the daily papers, pipe tobacco and sugar. In the 70s and 80s, the concept of healthy snacking had not yet been invented. The government wasn't worried about our sugar intake, they were just happy we weren't being eaten by Alsatians. So we approached the counter with our pocket money. Maybe you had 10p, maybe 20p if it was a good week, and the pressure of choice was immense. Did you go for the quarter of sweets weighed out from the jar? The rosy apples, the cola cubes that would shred the roof of your mouth, or the rhubarb and custards? Or did you go for the branded stuff, a Wham bar that could pull a filling out of your tooth faster than any dentist, a Sherbet Fountain with that licorice stick that was technically edible but tasted like wood? And of course, the most controversial item of all, candy cigarettes, sticks of white sugar with a red tip, sold in boxes that looked exactly like the real thing. We would stand on the street corner in the freezing drizzle, puffing on these sugar sticks, pretending to be sophisticated adults, completely unaware that we looked ridiculous. That walk home was our decompression time. It was the buffer zone between the strict rules of school and the different but equally strict rules of home. We dragged it out as long as possible. We swung our heavy leather satchels around our heads. We jumped over cracks in the pavement because, as we all knew, stepping on a crack would result in a broken back for our mothers. We took safety advice from a squirrel named Tufty and a Green Cross code man who looked like a superhero. But eventually the journey had to end. You would turn the corner onto your street, you'd see your house, and the realization would hit you. The freedom is over. Now the rituals begin. You'd reach into your pocket for the key, maybe it was on a piece of string around your neck if you were a latchkey kid, and you'd unlock the front door. And that is where the real British after-school experience truly began. The moment the front door clicked shut behind you, the atmosphere changed instantly. You were no longer an explorer of the urban wilderness, you were now a subject in the kingdom of Mum. The first thing that hit you was the smell. Every British house in the 70s and 80s had a very specific olfactory signature. It was a cocktail of Mr. Sheen furniture polish, damp coats drying in the hallway, and the faint, lingering aroma of cabbage that had been boiled since last Tuesday. If you were a latchkey kid, wearing your house key on a piece of string around your neck like a military dog tag, you walked into a silent house. But for many, Mum was there. And before you could even think about grabbing a biscuit, the commandment was issued. A directive so powerful that it was basically etched into the wallpaper. Get that uniform off now. You see, in the 21st century, school uniforms are relatively cheap and disposable. But back then, a school blazer wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a financial investment. It probably cost more than your dad's first car. It was bought 2 sizes too big so you could grow into it, meaning for the first 3 years of secondary school, you looked like a shrinking detective with sleeves covering your hands entirely. You were terrified of damaging it. Ripping your blazer trousers wasn't just an accident, it was a domestic tragedy. You didn't just get grounded, you felt the weight and bringing financial ruin upon your entire family. So you didn't lounge around in your uniform, you didn't sit on the sofa in your grey school trousers. You went upstairs immediately to perform the ritual of the change. And what did we change into? This is where the nostalgia gets a bit itchy. We didn't change into cool branded leisure wear, we changed into play clothes. This was a category of clothing that consisted entirely of things that were too ugly to be worn in public, but too intact to be thrown away. For the boys, it was often a pair of corduroy trousers that made a voot-voot sound when you walked, creating static electricity strong enough to power a small village. Or maybe a hand-knitted jumper from an auntie, made of wool so coarse it felt like wearing a wire fence. For the girls, it was crimplene, that indestructible synthetic fabric that would survive a nuclear apocalypse. We looked like a generation of miniature, mismatched catalogue models, but we were comfortable. Well, apart from the itching. Once changed, you came back downstairs. And if it was winter, which, let's be honest, in our memories it always seems to be, you had to deal with the temperature. Central heating was a luxury, not a right. Many of us grew up in houses where the only warm room was the living room thanks to the gas fire or the coal fire. The rest of the house was basically a refrigerator. You learned to move through the hallway with speed. You didn't walk, you sprinted from the warm living room to the kitchen and back, preserving body heat like a deep-sea diver. But the cold didn't matter because at 4 o'clock, the altar was activated, the television. The TV in the corner of the room was a piece of furniture. It was wood-panelled, it was heavy, and it had buttons that made a satisfying industrial funk sound when you pressed them. There were no remote controls. If you wanted to change the channel, you were the remote control. Your dad would bark orders, put it on ITV, and you would trudge across the carpet to push the button. We only had 3 channels: BBC One, BBC Two and ITV. Channel 4 didn't show up until 1982, and even then we weren't sure what to make of it. But from 4 p.m. to 5:30 p.m, those channels belonged to us. It started with the younger stuff. Rainbow with Zippy and George, which looking back was far more surreal than we realised. Or the Magic Roundabout, which I am now convinced was created by people who had enjoyed the swinging 60s a little too much. Then, as the afternoon wore on, the shows got serious. Blue Peter, the ultimate moral compass of British childhood. We watched presenters make incredible creations out of sticky back plastic, washing up liquid bottles and old coat hangers. They told us, "Here's one I made earlier," and we believed them. We desperately wanted a Blue Peter badge, the highest honour a British child could receive, granting you free entry to museums and a sense of superiority over your peers. And then the grit, Grange Hill. When the opening theme of Grange Hill started, you knew things were getting real. This wasn't puppets and magic. This was a school that looked like ours, with scary teachers and bullies. It taught us about the harsh realities of life while we sat safe on our living room rugs. But there was always a ticking clock, because we knew deep down that this golden period of television was finite. At 5:30 p.m. or 5:45 p.m, the news would start. The tone would shift, the fun was over. And then the scariest image of all. If you watched TV at the wrong time, or if the transmission ended, you faced her, the test card girl. A frozen image of a girl playing noughts and crosses with a terrifying clown doll accompanied by a high-pitched continuous tone. That clown still haunts the nightmares of an entire generation. But before the news and before the clown, there was the most important sound of the evening. A sound coming from the kitchen, the clattering of pans. It was 5 p.m, and in 1970s Britain, 5 p.m. meant one thing and one thing only. It was time for tea. Not dinner, tea. First, let's clear up a linguistic confusion that still baffles the rest of the world. At 1 p.m, we had dinner at school. At 5 p.m, we had tea. If you called the evening meal dinner, people assumed you were either royalty or you had ideas above your station.
Tea happened at 5 p.m. sharp. Not 5:05, not 5:10. If you weren't at the table when the plate hit the placemat, you were risking starvation. And unlike today, where families often eat in shifts or in front of the TV, back then the television was strictly off. The only entertainment allowed was staring at your siblings and trying to kick them under the table without your dad noticing. Now, let's talk about the cuisine. If modern nutritionists looked at a standard British child's diet in the 1970s, they would weep. It was the era of beige. We didn't eat fresh vegetables, we ate convenience. This was the space age of food technology. Why peel a potato when you could have smash? Powdered potato granules that you mixed with boiling water to create a substance that defied nature. We loved it, mostly because of the robotic Martians in the advert, not because it tasted like actual potato. Then there were the mains. Find us crispy pancakes, a breadcrumbed pocket containing a molten lava of minced beef or cheese that was hotter than the surface of the sun. You always burned your tongue. It was a rite of passage. Or perhaps it was beans on toast, a culinary masterpiece. Or spam fritters. Or if Mum was feeling exotic, a Vesta curry. This was a dehydrated curry in a box that introduced millions of British families to the concept of spice, which in 1975 meant mildly yellow and containing sultanas. We drank squash, orange or blackcurrant that was so strong it made your teeth vibrate. And we had to finish everything. The Clean Plate Club was a real institution. "Think of the starving children," Mum would say, guilt-tripping us into finishing that last piece of gristly liver. But the reward for survival was sweet. Literally. Afters. Pudding. This was where the 70s truly shone. Angel delight. A powder whisked with milk to create a chemically stable, air-filled mousse that tasted like clouds made of sugar. Arctic roll. Ice cream wrapped in sponge and jam. Or tinned fruit cocktail with carnation evaporated milk. We scraped those bowls clean until the pattern wore off the china. Once the plates were cleared and washed up, by hand, of course, dishwashers were things you saw in American movies, the mood darkened. It was time for homework. There were no iPads, no Google, no Wikipedia to copy and paste from. If you didn't know the capital of Peru, you had to go and find the heavy, dusty Encyclopedia Britannica on the bookshelf, assuming your parents had paid the salesman enough installments to actually own the volume with P in it. We wrote with fountain pens, and let's be honest, fountain pens were designed to ruin lives. You would spend 20 minutes writing a beautiful sentence, and then bludge! A giant blue ink blot would explode onto the page. You'd try to fix it with blotting paper, but you'd just smear it into a Rorschach test.
You'd have to use ink eraser, a gritty rubber that didn't remove the ink, but successfully removed the top 3 layers of the paper, leaving a hole in your book. The frustration was physical. But you rushed through it. You scribbled. You memorized your times tables by rote until your brain went numb. Because you could hear it, through the window. The sound of other kids playing. This was the torture. The sun was going down, the golden light was hitting the street, and you were stuck inside, conjugating French verbs. But the second Mum checked your work and nodded, you were gone. "I'm going out to play," you'd shout, already halfway out the door. "Don't go past the main road, and be back when the streetlights come on," she'd yell back. "Be back when the streetlights come on." The universal curfew of British childhood. We didn't have watches. We didn't have mobile phones to check in. We relied on the municipal electricity grid to tell us when to go home. The street was our kingdom. We didn't need playgrounds with soft rubber matting and safety rails. We had a curb and a ball. That was Kirby. We played British Bulldog, a game that was essentially a contact sport played on concrete, involving one person charging into 30 others. It was banned in every school playground because of the casualties, so we just played it in the street instead. We rode bikes. If you were lucky, you had a rally chopper, the coolest bike ever made, with its gear stick on the frame, perfect for causing injury, and that high-backed seat. You'd put a playing card in the spokes to make it sound like a motorbike. You were basically Steve McQueen. We built dens in the bushes, we climbed trees that were definitely too high, we grazed our knees, ripped our jeans, and got into arguments that were resolved without parental intervention. It was chaotic, unregulated, and slightly dangerous. And it was magnificent. But then, the flicker. The amber glow above your head. The streetlights buzzed into life. The spell was broken. You knew you had exactly 4 minutes to get home before your mum started worrying, or worse, before your dad came out to whistle for you like you were a sheepdog. You ran home, breathless, smelling of fresh air and dirt, ready for the final and most traumatic event of the week. Sunday night, bath night. Now, if you were a child in the 70s, you know that personal hygiene was not a daily event. It was a weekly event, specifically Sunday evening.
The concept of a daily shower was something we saw in American movies or science fiction. In a British home, hot water was expensive. It required turning on the immersion heater, a device that your dad guarded as if it were the launch codes for a nuclear missile. So we shared. The Sunday bath ritual followed a strict hierarchy. If you were the eldest or the favorite, you got the clean water, you got the bubbles, you got the warmth. But if you were the second or, heaven forbid, the third child in the queue, you were entering the danger zone. By the time it was your turn, the water was no longer clear. It was a grey, tepid soup. It was human broth. Floating in it were the ghostly remnants of your siblings' week. Dirt from the knees, fluff from the socks, and the sad remains of the bubbles that had long since died. And the water was shallow. To save money, the bath was filled to a depth of about 4 inches. You didn't float, you grounded. You splashed this lukewarm grey sludge over yourself, shivering uncontrollably because the bathroom was freezing. Then came the scrubbing. Mums in the 70s didn't believe in gentle exfoliation. They believed in sanding. They used flannels that were stiff as boards and soap that smelled of disinfectant. They scrubbed your ears until they were bright red. They scrubbed your knees until the skin was raw. It wasn't cleaning, it was an exorcism of dirt. Getting out was worse. There were no heated towel rails. You stepped out onto a cold linoleum floor and were wrapped in a towel that had been line-dried outside in the wind, making it roughly the same texture as a cheese grater. You dried yourself vigorously, not to get dry, but to generate friction heat to stop hypothermia setting in. Clean, red raw, and smelling of coal tar soap, you were sent to bed. Bedtime was non-negotiable, 7:30 p.m., maybe 8 p.m. if you were older. You climbed the stairs to your bedroom. Now, we need to talk about the temperature of a 1970s bedroom. It wasn't just cold, it was atmospheric. Many of us remember waking up in the morning and seeing Jack Frost's ferns, beautiful, intricate patterns of ice on the inside of the window. You put on your pajamas, often striped winceyette or nylon, and you dived into bed. We didn't have duvets or continental quilts, as they were suspiciously called. We had sheets and blankets, layers of heavy, scratchy wool blankets topped with an eiderdown, a shiny, slippery, silk-like quilt that would inevitably slide off the bed in the middle of the night, leaving you to freeze.
There were no distractions, no glowing screens under the pillow, no notifications, just the darkness, the wind rattling the single glazed windows and the sound of your parents' muffled voices downstairs watching the news. You might read a book by torchlight under the covers, an Enid Blyton adventure or a Beano annual, until the batteries faded, and then silence. You lay there, thinking about the conker you hid in the airing cupboard, the unfinished game of Monopoly, and the spelling test tomorrow. You drifted off, safe in the knowledge that tomorrow the bell would ring at 3:30 p.m. and the adventure would start all over again. Looking back now, through the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia, it's easy to romanticize it all. Was it really better? We had lead in the petrol, asbestos in the ceilings, and only 3 TV channels. We were cold a lot of the time. The food was questionable, and the fashion was criminal. But there was something special about that era. We were the last generation to have an analog childhood. We learnt patience because we had to wait a whole week for the next episode of our favorite show. We learned resilience because if we fell over in the street, we just got up and limped home. We learned creativity because we were often bored, and boredom is the mother of invention.
We built castles out of cardboard boxes and spaceships out of washing up bottles. We were free in a way that modern children simply aren't. The world felt bigger, wilder, and yes, maybe a little bit more dangerous, but it was ours. We didn't document our lives for likes or shares, we just lived them. The memories aren't stored on a server in California. They are stored in the scars on our knees, the taste of sherbet on our tongues, and the warmth of a family gathering around a flickering TV set. But what about you? What triggers that time travel for you? Is it the smell of a paraffin heater? The taste of a specific sweet that you can't find anymore? Or the trauma of the Sunday night bathwater? I want to hear your stories in the comments below. Let's turn that comment section into a time capsule. Tell me the one thing you miss the most and the one thing you are glad is gone forever. I'm voting for the scratchy toilet paper. If this journey back to 4 p.m. brought a smile to your face, please give this video a like. And if you want to keep the nostalgia alive, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Otherwise, I'll send the test card girl to stare at you while you sleep. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next memory. Cheers!